right, man, any words of encouragement for the youngsters out there trying to grind it out, trying to make a change, trying to find, like you said, the pain, like people who are like unsatisfied with their lives, what advice, what self-help advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me was I was always willing to lean into discomfort. I think that's what separates most people is like, they'll like, oh, discomfort's bad. But if you reframe it as like, oh, discomfort, like you wouldn't go to the gym like and just lift 5-pound weights and expect to get jacked. You got to place stress on yourself and then you build back stronger. So it's uncomfortable at the start, actually at every stage, but you just learn to get more comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
There's a nice little soundbite, fortune cookie. But like lean into it. And I think you do that for 6 to 12 months and you'll look back on your life and you'll be glad you did. It's one of the most rewarding things because you can look back like, yeah, I did that. And you feel good about yourself.
That's great advice. I think do you have any, like, you know, I was just in Mexico. We stayed on the 23rd floor. And I'm like always so nervous around heights. And I'm like looking this up. I'm like, all right, man, how do I like, and then you realize you're like, well, I say that I'm afraid of heights. Like I say that out loud. I say that internally. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to stop saying I'm afraid of heights. And I'm going to start saying like, I'm going to get comfortable. Right. And I think like, so when it comes to facing your fears and things like that, how do you deal with those challenges? Like, because you just said lean into it. It made me think about that.
Yeah, so I'll kind of give you a brief story about myself. Like I used to struggle with social anxiety. Yeah. And it was because I played this narrative in my head because I got made fun of for being a fat kid as a young guy. And I would just play this narrative like, oh, I'm not good enough or I'm shy, blah, blah, blah. And I'll just play that narrative over and over. And then since I identified with it, my actions would follow that. And since my actions would follow that, other people would see it, reinforce it, and then you got that loop. And it wasn't until I read the book, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, that I realized, oh, I'm not my feelings. Like that's just a feeling and I can choose whether or not I adopt that as my identity. So when I started challenging the belief that I am socially anxious when it came up, I would stop and be like, oh, wait. You know, that's just a feeling. I am not socially anxious. I am not anything. Right. That is just a feeling. And when I stopped identifying with the feeling, I created this separation and I recognized it for what it was. It was just a feeling. And we didn't solve it overnight, but it was I was building that pattern recognition and rewiring my brain. And over time, I was
cognitive and behavioral therapy is what that's
exactly.
called.
Yeah, exactly. So I got to rewire my brain and I started to go the other direction. Like, okay, let's look at all the times I was confident. Okay, I asked that girl's number at the coffee shop. I started talking with that stranger, the old guy at the mall. X, Y, and Z. And it's like, oh, okay. Like, would a socially anxious person do that? No, right. I would actually say a confident person would. Yeah. And then you start building that identity, and then you just go the other direction. And so it's like really kind of getting really logical with things, and because we can get very emotional and we get caught up in it, and I still do at times, but I gotta stop and pause and like, oh, like I'm feeling this right now, but that's just a feeling, and I could just choose to not identify as that and then go the other way.
Out of everything you said, I think to me that advice is a really good piece. I think like understanding that. There's a guy that I like a lot. God, I can't remember his name. Joe Dispenza. That's what his name is.
Yeah.
And he's got this book, and I listened to it as I was mowing my lawn a bunch of times, and it's called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And it talks exactly about what you just mentioned there, Dakota, which is like, hey, man, like we play the bad clips back in our head. Like we play all the times it didn't happen. Like we don't remember that, but we remember the stuff that like the one time I fell down and embarrassed myself on the steps, right? And everybody saw me. Or I can remember in Mexico just recently, like I'm totally the guy who will like humiliate myself. So I'm really good at that actually. But I remember tripping and like, when getting off a boat and falling flat on my face, it's like, and my attitude is like, one thing I learned as a young guy was like I took a train across the country from Washington to Mississippi. And I remember getting on that train and there was a girl to my right. And I was like thinking, oh man, if I approach this girl, there's a chance something could happen on this train ride. I'm going to be on here for like 5 days. And it was like in my mind, it was take a left and go sit by yourself or take a right and something might happen. and I took a right, and it was a good train ride. And you know what I mean? Like, and I remember just thinking at that moment, like, I just made the decision to be confident, right? As a young guy, I made the decision to get uncomfortable and talk to this girl. And then I made the decision to go a little bit further, and like, we had a great train ride, like, you know what I mean? But everything is about those decisions, and so many of them are made in our head, right, Dakota? Like, before they even had a chance to mature and be the true person that we are. I think you're right, man. It's mastering those emotions and mastering those feelings. And so many times I struggle with that with my kids. It's like, do I be super tough on them? Like, do I like let them cry, or do I tell them to toughen up? Like, you know what I mean? Like, where do I go? Where do I turn them into like these tough people that can handle their emotions and control their emotions at the same point in time, you know, not be a complete hypocrite, you know, because we all struggle with things, even, you know, and you're trying to teach your kids to be the best.